Welcome to you all. It's lovely to see some familiar faces. Some people have got their videos off, which is fine. At this point, I always say I'm going to now mute everyone in a way you can't unmute yourselves. Aron, I'm going to unmute you though, so you'll have to click on unmute. Otherwise, this will be a very strange one-sided, it'll be a monologue instead of an interview. Gary, is that right? I can say I've got the thumbs up from Gary.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and
yeah, cool.
I think we can hear you fine, and I hope you guys can hear me, and welcome to Simone. So we're going to kick it off. Aron is a young man, as you can see, but through his website of what's called Tales of Mortar, Brick and Mortar, he's been documenting a lot of the familiar haunts that many of us grew up in, well before his time, by the way, walking up and down, let's say, Glen Huntly Road or anywhere in Elstonwick, and now he's documenting elsewhere. He's been documenting about the shops that people have had, in some cases, for generations. And I must admit, I'll ask him shortly, but I wonder a little bit about the possible demise of some of these shops. But let's get on to it. And first question I have for you, Aron, is what motivated you?
Sure. So I think I started around 2017 at the beginning of the year. And I remember I just finished studying. So I finished studying journalism and business. And I was at this point where I finished my degree and I didn't want to be a journalist. And I didn't really want to do anything in business. So I was a bit directionless. And I remember at the same time as, feeling this sort of way, I was reading a book about Fitzroy, the suburb Fitzroy. And it was this big book which involved all of these stories about the characters and the buildings and the streets of Fitzroy over the course of many, many years. And it was just all these different stories that made up the sort of oral, well, I guess then before the book was released, this sort of oral history of the suburb. And it occurred to me that, in the same way I grew up in Caulfield, and there are all these shops and buildings and people that have, this rich sort of history, but, I hadn't really seen it documented anywhere. I'm sure it's been documented plenty of times, but I hadn't seen it, I guess. And this idea that, all these places I was familiar with, once these shops sort of close and their stories aren't told, they sort of, that history, potentially disappears. It's so much harder to capture. So I just remember having all these different thoughts. It was just something that, it was kind of fleeting thoughts. And I remember I was walking down Glen Huntly Road and there was a picket fence manufacturer. I think it's called Malvern Pickets, I think. And I just remember, thinking, how do you get to the point in your life? What are the factors building up to the point where you decide to, build picket fences? And then, what are the challenges, the day-to-day challenges of running a picket fence manufacturer and then running it over so many years and, potentially having kids and then the kids growing up in a, picket fence manufacturer and how that would, shape your life. And I just remember thinking all these different things. And I thought, maybe I'll try and have a chat with the owner or somebody there and see, the story of this picket fence manufacturer. I think they'd manufacture it. But anyway, so I went up to them and, asked them if they were interested in having a chat, and they were busy, so they weren't. But down the road, there was a butcher, Ben Howard Butcher on Glen Huntly Road, which was in their last week of trading. And I thought, all right, well, I'll, have a chat with Ben and see, what it's been like to run at this, local butcher for so many years and how the butcher trade has changed over the years and the customers he's had these relationships with. So he was very happy to have a chat about his time running this butcher. And so I wrote the story up. I took some terrible photos and wrote the story up and, shared it around, and friends and family said, oh, that's interesting. I'd be curious to read about this or that. So, I interviewed my local barber, Cruise and Cuts, Hussein on Hawthorne Road. And then there was a bookshop that's now closed, Out of Print Books, ETC, I think it was called, on Glen Huntly Road. So I had a chat with Ken, who was this, I think, 80 or 90-year-old man who ran this bookshop for so many years. And yeah, it sort of evolved from there. That's basically how it started.
Wow. Now, you said you took photos, but I know you've actually since teamed up with Tatiana Scott, I think is her name. How did that come about, and what's her role in the exercise?
Sure. So I think about after writing these stories for, 6 months or so, or 8 months or whatever, I wanted to turn this into, something that was a hobby, something I could maybe do as a profession. That was, still is my sort of something that I'm really, wanting to do. So there was a point when I emailed all these different media organizations, and one of them was Triple R, the radio station. So I had an interview on Triple R, much like this one, I guess. And so Tatiana, who's a professional photographer, got in touch with me after the interview, and we sort of met up. And basically the discussion was, I really like the project you're working on. The shops are really interesting, but the photos don't do justice to the story, which is true because I was taking them on my my, bad phone, and I'm not a photographer, and I was having to interview the people and take the photos on my phone, and it didn't do justice to, the space they worked in and the story they told. So in terms of so now Tatiana and I, it's a collaboration, we do it together. So where before I would do the interviews and she would take the photos, now we do the interviews together. And then she'll take the photos and I'll write the story afterwards. And I think, there's so much that you can capture, having a chat with a shop owner and, writing their story, but that doesn't really capture the physical space or the tools they work with or the skills they have. If they're a tailor, taking photos of the suits they're making don't really capture it on a phone, or if they're someone who works in shoe repairs, you can't really capture that on a phone. So she does a really good job in capturing, I guess, the visual story, and as well as the interviewing component of it as well.
Actually, the shoe repairs is an interesting one because one of the ones you've interviewed or catalogued, if you like, is Blight's, which is, and in fact, I remember going there as a kid. I haven't been there for ages, but I remember going there as a kid and having my shoes repaired. It's been there for as long as I can recall. And the truth of the matter is I feel bad, but the truth of the matter is nowadays the cost of shoes has dropped, and I wear it till I wear them out and I throw them out and I don't really get them repaired. But perhaps we'll come back to the future.
Well, that was one of the stories where I really didn't do justice to the space on my phone. So that's one of those ones where I'd love to go back with Tatiana and for her to take the photos and take proper photos that really do justice to the story and the business.
So how many shops have you already catalogued?
I think we've between 50 and 60 on the websites. We've done, different projects with councils and things, so not including that. So I think it's, I think it's closer to 60 that we've done since 2017 or so. So
what's the process of selecting these stores? How do you find them? Or do they come to you?
So it's a combination. So initially when I started, it was me going up. It was places I knew. So it was, my local barber or the bookshop I went to, so on. And then I think over time I received recommendations from different people. And then there was also a process of me just walking up and down a particular high street or something and just picking shops at random based on the fact that, they might look interesting or have a rich history, which is not a particularly good process because there are certain places that look like they've been around for a long time. But that's just part of the charm of the design or something. So it's a combination. But I think over time it's now more people recommending places.
So how long does each of these projects take per store?
Sure. So I think it's, there is a variety of things that go into it. So not including sort of choosing the shop. So the interview itself probably takes about an hour. And then in terms of writing it up, an hour give or take. So depending on the mood of the shop owner or depending on their story or how keen they are to have a chat, could take way longer than an hour, could take slightly less. And then in terms of writing the story, I'll usually listen to the interview at least twice. So the transcript is sort of accurate. And then in terms of writing it, who knows, it depends how long it takes to edit it and make sure it, flows chronologically. And that's just my part of it. So I guess with Tatiana, I don't know how long it takes for her to edit all the photos and put all the photos together. But it's quite a, long sort of process for each story.
So, Aron, if you came into my store today and spent that hour, when would I see the fruit of your labour up on the website?
So I guess it depends on what commitments we have. I try and do it as soon as possible. And then I think recently, at least, it wasn't something I did throughout the whole process, but, definitely for at least the second half of it. Once I write the story up, I'll write a draft of it and then I'll try and go to the shop owner and review it in paper because, these things are lost oftentimes through email. So I'll try and go over it with the shop owner, and, whatever changes they want to make, we'll go through that. And then, I don't know how long it will take between the interview and getting up on the website, but usually it's pretty quick.
Okay. Now, you're a Scopus boy, I believe. You weren't in one of the classes I taught. So I think I left Scopus many years before you were born, probably. In fact, I did. In what way has your Jewish background informed the project or not at all?
This is something I hadn't really thought about until I guess the question was sort of prompted to me, and I've spent a couple of weeks, I guess, reflecting on this idea. I don't know about my education, but at least in terms of my Jewish background, I don't think that this idea is unique, to Judaism and Jewish people, but I think there is that strong sense of, community and the preservation and conservation of, community, and, there's the spaces that form the community. So, I mean, it doesn't exist, these communities don't exist in a vacuum, they exist with the background of these shops and these, streets and places. And I think, there probably is a history of, alienation, so maybe it's more acute to, I guess, Jewish people maybe to want to preserve these places and these communities. And it is this idea that, once these shops disappear, or if they disappear and their stories aren't documented, it creates that sort of absence. You sort of potentially lose that history. And so I think preserving these places and these stories, maybe, I guess, entrenches you more in the community, I suppose, because, Caulfield, if you remove all the shops in Caulfield, it's not the same Caulfield, I guess. It's a different place. So, yeah. Sorry, I think my connection.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the oldest shop you find?
So can you hear me okay? I think I might be having some internet troubles.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So the older shop, there have been shops that have documented that have been around since... Sorry about this. So there have been shops that I've documented that have been around since...
We're not aware of a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so since the 1800s, sorry about this. Blight's shoe repair has been around, not Blight's, Haddam's has been around since the mid-1800s. There was a billiards shop in Fitzroy, Harry Evans and Sons, which has also been around since the 1800s and within the same family as well, so across 5 generations or so. And then there have been also shops that have been around since the 1960s or the 1970s that have been with the one shop owner. So, the one shop owner who's been around for 40 or 50 years. So yeah, definitely, a lot of shops that have been around since the 1930s or so.
1930s. So what do your stories tell you about the ease or otherwise of opening up a shop front on the street post-war?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as well. So I don't have, particularly rich history, like a strong understanding of history, I guess post-war Melbourne history. So I don't know if I'm able to answer that, with much depth. But something I do think about a lot is the fact that for so many of these shop owners, they, opened a shop. So I don't know how easy it was to open a shop, post-war, but they've opened the shop and then they've stayed in the one profession for such a long period of time. And they found satisfaction in this profession and, they've upskilled within the profession and developed those relationships. And then they might have kids who grow up in the business and then they take on the business, which contrasts so much to my background and the background of so many people that I know who have so many different jobs that change, every few months or every few years because of a lack of job security or because, they want to challenge themselves and move on to a different field. So this idea that like you can enter a job or create a job and then, be in that same job for 40 years or 50 years or 60 years and then that job becomes generational is such a foreign concept to me and something that I'm so interested in. And I guess the other thing as well is that, when you think of starting a business nowadays, it's generally something online or something that might be intangible, not necessarily, like I wouldn't even know how to start a shop. How do you even get to the position where you're able to open a physical shop and sell products? It's such a foreign concept to me as well. So I think a combination of those two things is something that I'm really interested in. So I don't know how easy it was to open those shops post-war, but just that idea that, it was possible and then you could stay in it for so many years and find satisfaction within that job.
Right. Wow. Well, actually, that leads me to wonder then about the next generation. Is the next generation staying with the shop or are they moving around, as you said, the younger generation keep on changing every Monday and Thursday?
So I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I'm not chatting to the people who, I guess I do chat to people who have, working part-time and following their own interests, but it is something that I find really interesting as well. This idea that, the second generation or maybe the third generation, they're having to balance, the potentially, the weight of carrying on the tradition and the history of a particular shop and then following their own passions and desires. I imagine there might be a lot of contestation between those two ideas of wanting to, do something different, and then if they leave that shop, then potentially that shop might close or go under different hands. So yeah, it must be. It's just something that I'm really fascinated in. If I was to do a different project, it would be interviewing just the next generation about how they battle those things. Those different. The two sides, the choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the most amazing story?
I think the stories that I'm most interested in are the ones that really involve people's hands, so tailors and shoe repairs, and where there's such an incredible amount of skill involved and machineries that you have to master. I think the two that, well, I guess the one in particular that comes to mind is Frank's, the bakery on Glen Huntly Road as well, who came from Germany. He had the story he told was that he had the sourdough in his pockets, and then he traveled overseas and he still uses that. It's the same sort of sourdough in this big bucket that he uses to bake the bread that's lasted so many years and years and years, which is really interesting. It was just a really interesting story. And then the other one that I found really interesting was a shop called TW Sands, which is on Swanson Street, but sort of on the Carlton end of Swanson Street. And they basically sold and repaired kerosene lamps. It was something I didn't know anything about. Kerosene lamps is, what I knew about it, it was like a novelty or something that was used, many years ago. But they were telling me about how they all work and how for certain families who live in regional areas, it's still so relevant and such a critical, source of light for these people. And, the passion they developed for kerosene lamps over the years, and just mainly just how they worked and how you put it all together. And yeah, I just found that really fascinating. It's something I had no idea about until I had a chat with them.
So what are they doing with their kerosene lamps nowadays?
Well, I know they moved locations, so I don't think they're in the city anymore. They're still, I think last time I spoke to them, their business is still operating, but not in the same location. Well, I mean, it's a real passion for people. I think also for a lot of film sets and things, they use kerosene lamps. So for that sort of, but yeah, I just found that discussion and story really interesting. And the photos were amazing as well, because it lends itself to great photos, I think.
Wow. Now, I don't know if you've seen a film called You've Got Mail. Have you seen it?
I tried to watch it, but I haven't. I couldn't find it.
Okay, I'll tell you a bit about the storyline. By the way, everyone who's listening, I don't watch movies, and certainly not chick flicks. Okay, I might, possibly, okay? But there's... Okay, Aron, I think they will know me too well.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter, there's a great film called... It's the same actors, by the way, as Sleepless in Seattle. It's with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. It's called You've Got Mail. Not it like this if you've seen it. And what you're talking about actually resonates with me, and I want to ask you. So basically, Meg Ryan runs it's called the Shop Around the Corner, I think it's called. The Shop Around the Corner. It's a bookstore, small, but she and her staff know every single book that's in there. They sit and read with the kids, and you walk in and they know exactly what you want and what you need and that sort of stuff. And Fox Books is opening up around the corner. It's multi-level, multiplex and so on, and pretty much does the shop around the corner out of business, basically. But the staff there, by the way, have no idea. They've got an enormous range, but they have no idea what they're selling. They don't know what people want and so on. That's not like this if people know what I'm talking about. And that's pretty much the storyline. Of course, the two fall in love. But anyway, I shouldn't have given so much away. To that story, though, about the shop around the corner with its niche market and the people who know the customers personally and they know the stock versus the big multiplex that sells everything but they have no idea about the customers or their stock. How much does that resonate in the stories that you've been cataloguing?
It definitely resonates. So I wanted to watch the movie. I haven't been able to find it, but I think the idea of the project, or it might not have been why I initially started it, but I guess the idea that's developed over time is that for so many of these shops, the transaction of goods and services is what they do, but they also hold some cultural value and social value and even architectural value because the buildings shape the identity of the community, and people go there and they develop relationships with the traders and the staff there over time. And for a lot of people, it's the reason why they might go out is to have a chat with somebody who works in the shop about their day-to-day and their family and that sort of thing. So I think that part of that is to be valued beyond just what they sell and the products that you buy. There's value there. And then also, I think something that I've found quite interesting over time is that in terms of the history that they know, because so many times they're in the one spot, and then the streets change around them, or the population changes around them, the customers change over time. So if you want to know about the streets that you live in, or the suburbs that you live in, the shop owners are such a great person to go to because they have a rich history, working there over such a long period. So yeah, it definitely resonates with me, this idea that there is, you know, social and cultural value within these shops. And yeah, I think particularly in these small shops where they're really invested in the products they're selling, they have such a great knowledge of the products they're selling. So I guess there's a particular story I wrote about Video Busters before it closed, and about how this guy had watched, you know, every week he'd watch all of the movies. And so, you know, there's all these movies on Netflix and things, but I mean, if you wanted to, you know, he was the guy you would go to for the recommendation of the movie, you know, and if you were feeling a particular thing, he would not, because he'd seen it and he was passionate about movies and this was his great hobby and his great passion. So yeah, it definitely resonates with me. I mean, I'm keen to see the movie, but the idea, the way that you frame the movie to me is something that I'm, you know, resonates with me.
Yeah. Okay. What if your child, please God, in 20 years' time is cataloguing, going up and down the streets? What's the future of these shops? Is your son or daughter going to be able to go to the same shops that you've been looking at now, or they're not going to be around?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure. I guess for me, it's just, you know, I'm just writing the story. So I'm, you know, I'm not an economist. I don't know. You know, I think the one thing is I find it difficult to like put all of these shops in like one homogenized sort of category. They're all the same and they all, you know, fall over together, or, you know, they all have their distinct personalities and, you know, some shops are definitely, you know, they've got greater longevity than sort of other shops. But I think something, I think that you read all the time is constantly reinforced that if you want certain shops to survive, it requires, you know, local support. So it's not something, again, that you have to really go and support them if you want them to sort of hang around, I guess. So it depends on the actions of individual behaviors, and if you have the opportunity to go and support these shops that you're passionate about and you know the people behind them, then yeah, it requires, you know, individual consumer action, I guess.
Okay, well, that's an interesting segue to something I want to ask, Aron. Okay, I want to support them, but the truth of the matter is I can go online to Big W and get a free delivery because it's over $50 or whatever and get something delivered. I can get about 5 times the quantity than I can get in Hattams, for example. Are these shops staying in touch with the competition, or is it just beyond them?
So I mean, I don't think Tales of Brick and Mortar is a thing saying don't go and support, you know, the bigger chains. You know, a lot of these places, they have greater options and, you know, potentially better value as well. I think a lot of it is just reinforcing the fact that, you know, as I said before, there is social and cultural value in these shops. It's not just economic. And I think a lot of the times as well, they may have that same offering, but, you know, the local hardware shop doesn't have the advertising of Bunnings all the time. So, you know, they're constantly reinforced with Bunnings have these tools, Bunnings have all these things. So when you think you need it, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is Bunnings. So it requires a bit of, you know, lateral thinking, I guess, to say, you know, I'm going to go to the local hardware shop because, you know, I know the person behind it and, you know, my purchase really supports them, I guess. So it's a combination, you know, it's a combination, I guess, or not necessarily a combination. It's not, you know, me sliding anyone for going to the bigger chains, which of course I shop at as well. You know, I think it's just that, you know, it's important to record their stories, particularly because, you know, if they close down, then those stories potentially disappear. And I think there is this feeling that when a place is around 50 years or 60 years or 70 years or whatever it is, it feels like it'll be around forever, but that might not necessarily be the case. So I guess if you value these shops and you're in a, you know, position where you're able to, you know, support them and, you know, the product offering is still something that you, I guess, value, or even if it's just going in and having a chat with them or something like that, I think it's, you know, holds value, I guess.
Right. Okay, now we couldn't end this interview, not yet anyway, but without making mention of the latest disruptions. For the last 6 months, unless you've been in space, you would know that we've pretty much been in lockdown over periods. And the question is, how have these latest disruptions of the last 6 months affected those local shops? And is it the death knell for those shops?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so hard. You know, I'm just writing these stories. I don't, you know, the economic ramifications of this period is impossible for me to know. Something, I guess it's a bit of a tangent from the question, but something I've been thinking about, I guess, is the 5-kilometer radius that we've all been living in. And it's sort of, in some ways, forced you to support your local shop because you're not, you know, if you're used to driving to Chatston and it's out of your area, you might not necessarily be able to do that. So I think over this period, I don't know about, as mentioned, I'm not sure about the ramifications, but I think that there has been, I guess it's been reinforced that there are people behind these shops, and there are faces, and the people behind them. And perhaps over this, the last year or so, there has been a greater emphasis to support local shops. And yeah, I don't know. I think that there's resilience in that. I don't think that once you are able to go wherever you want, people will just abandon these local shops. I think that they've, those relationships that have been developed over years may have been further reinforced over this last year. So yeah, that's basically where I'm at the moment, I think.
Well, you've certainly instilled in me a greater passion for the local shop now. I mean, as I said, I'm quite a keen bargain hunter, but I now feel probably a greater sense of loyalty to my local shop. What I'm happy to do now is open up for questions. So perhaps if you wave to me, if you'd like to ask a question, or if you want to type something in the chat. And Sue, I did see your comment before. I apologise. I'm not quite sure why there was a problem. But if anyone's interested in asking a question to Aron before we bring this to a close, I'm no doubt there are lots of things I haven't considered. So either put in the chat or wave. And yes, Adrian, I'll unmute you, and then Adrian, you'll have to click on unmute on your end as well. Good.
Thanks. Aron, many years ago, I lived in St Kilda, Smith Street in particular, but Ackland Street and Barclay Street had a lot of shops there, and I was thinking particularly of Scheherazade, which is up near Luna Park.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, are they still in existence, and are they still trading? Because it certainly was a centre where Jewish people gathered.
I remember going there. Well, I didn't go there personally, but when I was a lot younger, we used to get dinner from there and food from there. I don't think so. I mean, I could be corrected on this. I have a feeling they closed down. Maybe that's just because I haven't been there for a while, but I think it closed. I don't know, mate. I'm sure somebody would be able to give a more certain answer on whether it's still open or closed. But I have a feeling it closed a couple of years ago, I think. Is that correct?
I think they did as well. Yes, I think so. Yeah.
I do remember going. They had really good chicken soup from memory. I remember as a kid getting the chicken soup from there. It was delicious.
And we've got a question, Gwen.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you went down in Ackland Street to Markus. They were a fantastic cake shop. It used to be, started off, of course, in Carlton, and was there for yonks. And then they moved into what we used to call the Village Bell. And the last time I was there was probably about 12 months ago. There are new owners there, but they've got all these beautiful photos of the beginning of the shop and of the original owners. And they're still making the same recipes. And that place has been going, well, since I was a little girl. So we won't go back that many years. But have you been in there at all?
Many years ago, I mean, I think I have been there as a customer. I think a couple of years ago, I went to some of the cake shops on Ackland Street, and at the time they weren't, I think that they weren't interested in, having a discussion. It is hard because I just go up to them and say, do you want to have a chat with me about your history of your shop? And a lot of time there's skepticism about it, but I haven't interviewed them. But it's something I'd like to do. I think those cake shops try again in the future.
That would be very interesting, because the people that own it now, when we were in there, they know the whole story of it, from when it first started, how they moved over, and the family that it was connected to. So you might find that very interesting.
For sure. I mean, I'm on the other side of Melbourne at the moment, so I haven't been able to document these shops. Okay. But as soon as I'm able to travel around, it's something that definitely the first thing I'm wanting to do is to interview these shops and the cake shops. Because I think there are still a couple on, that side of Ackland Street that I'd really like to interview and have a chat with them. So, I mean, I think as well, if somebody came and said, hi, this is a legitimate project, in advance, that would be helpful. But yeah, definitely something that I want to do. I think I saw in the comment, the website's talesofbrickandmortar.com.
Oh,
sorry about that.
My apologies.
No, that's okay. But yeah, it's something that I'm very eager to do.
Sorry, Tales of Brick. Sorry.
That's okay. I just saw it flick up on my screen.
Good. And Simone,
Yeah, I can answer the query about Scheherazade, and I haven't got a date, which I regret, but it was closed quite a few years ago. It actually was bought from Avram and Masha Zalesnikov, the legends. They sold it, and it was bought by, I believe it was a Russian man who eventually couldn't pay the rent. It was that's a really big factor in a lot of shops. And he transferred it to the corner of Hawthorne Road and Inkerman Road. And it didn't last very long. People just didn't come. It completely lost its sort of town. I don't know how you can possibly translate that, but it was really sad to see it go. But I think Masha and Avram, apart from their age, I think the rent was a factor also in why they didn't keep it going. But it certainly is a big part of a lot of people's lives in Melbourne. And I also wanted to mention another shop in Glen Huntley Road. Now I've forgotten what it was. Oh, Delgano's. You know, did you do Delgano's, Aaron?
I haven't. They're the oldest. I think they're the oldest shop on the street, so they predate Haddams and Blight's. I haven't. It's something that I just haven't, for whatever reason, I haven't approached them. But yeah, that's another one that I reached a point, I think, where I was a bit concerned about covering too many shops in the one area and really wanted to see different areas. And now I'm at the point where I've gone to different areas and I do want to go back to the area that I grew up in and, you know, lived in for so many years. And yeah, Delgano's is definitely a big one because I think they've been around. Yeah, is it still in the same family?
Yeah. I don't know the ownership, but it's certainly a thriving business still.
Yeah.
They've got a little competition down the road, another beautiful shop called Ruby's Gifts. My memory's failing me. And that's been there for about 4 or 5 years, but Delgano's is still as classy as it's always been.
Yeah.
That's my go-to shop for those types of things. And you're talking about, you know, there's a big difference between them and, say, Blight's, who, you know, his dad used his hands. It was a craft, as opposed to Delgano's, who sell stuff. Yeah. Not actually a craftsman, but they certainly have appeal.
I might interrupt here because we're running out of time. I'm conscious of the time. And I also I want to do some promotion for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and give you some advice. So, so thank you. The first thing I'll do is I'll say that if anyone's interested to buy Simone something from those, she's just told you how much she likes Delgano's. Some personal stuff. Firstly, Aron, I know lots of people are having nachas. I won't mention Mum. I won't mention Aron Lewin by name. But just to say she's having some nachas today and having a bit of chuckle. And she and I have been in touch, in fact, in relation to one of her pet projects, and we'll be looking at a function between St Kilda Shule and what was Bet Halochem at one point in time, the Zionist Disabled Veterans Organisation now, later on in the year. And also on a personal note, just to tell you that one of the earliest cake shops, in fact, belonged to my grandmother. It no longer exists, but some of you will recall it was called Carlisle Cake Shop. Yeah, I could see Gary's going like this. Carlisle Cake Shop. It was in Carlisle Street. It was, I think, the first kosher cake shop in Melbourne. That was my grandmother, who I must admit I didn't know. She passed away when I was just 3. But I do remember Mr. Peters serving us. He then took over and he was serving us. I remember some of the things like there was a chocolate umbrella or something. I don't know what people remember. I remember vaguely some things. So, Aron, thank you very, very much. Fascinating, very much appreciated. And it's lovely to hear from someone who's a young person. By the way, this week I became a senior citizen, so I can now talk about young, thanks very much. I can talk about young people, young person who's got such a passion for tradition and the local shop, and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much for organising this and for all the research involved in all the questions. I really enjoyed this chat. And also, just quickly, my email address is aronblewin@gmail.com. So if anyone has any shop suggestions, I'm also hoping to interview shops that have now closed down, like Scheherazad's, for example. It's something I haven't done in the past. But if anybody wants to email me with any suggestions regarding shops that, you know, they're interested in the story that hasn't been documented in the past, feel free to email me.
Right, thank you. And now a bit of a promotion, because some of these people are coming every single week, and just to say that next week we've got someone who flies around the globe as a courier for frozen embryos. He's going to tell us about his job and what it's meant lately to, Aaron, you can maybe type in your email again. He's going to talk about what it's meant lately when he's had to go into quarantine as a result of traveling around. So fascinating. We've got people who've grown up in Shepparton or Carlton or Brunswick coming up. And then after that, I've got someone who we almost lost during COVID. He was for a few months in the Alfred firstly on a ventilator, then an ECMO machine. Thank God he's doing well. And I'll interview him on the 15th of October. So we've got something lined up all the way through. Now, some people here are members of ours, some are not. That's okay. For members, we posted out almost 2 weeks ago a magazine called Under the Dome, and also a booklet looking like this, and also a face mask with our logo, and also a Rosh Hashanah card. So almost everyone apparently has now got it, which is fantastic. Our Care, I think we sent to some people. No, you haven't received yours yet. Hang on, I'll just unmute you. But for example, Lily, you go, yeah. So Lily's there. But if you haven't received yours, I'm hoping that you'll get it by Christmas.
I'm sure the residents have, but I'm talking about my one. Personally.
Oh my gosh! So Tiffany, Gail, I'm going to explain. By the way, if you haven't received yours yet, I apologise. We're hoping you'll get it by Christmas, not this year, next year. Australia Post is as reliable as it can be at the moment, as unreliable, Adrian saying, as unreliable as I apologise, but I've got copies on my doorstep. I'm not going to tell you that I live at 36 Aron Crescent. So I'm not going to say that. 36 twice, I'm not going to say, but outside my front door, there's copies of newsletter printed up, copies of this, copies of that. There are spare masks, so the Rosh Hashanah card. So they're all there on my doorstep, including the Kosher Australia Guide and so on, including a booklet that was published last week in our newsletter, giving you things to think about for Rosh Hashanah. So all that's on my doorstep. Again, I won't say it's 36 Aron Crescent. For Rosh Hashanah this year, we're going to be on our own, but the shul has already released at 9 o'clock this morning its first video. It goes for over half an hour. It's got Rabbi Glassman's sermon, Rabbi Nagel's sermon. I could see some people watched it. It's got Cousin Brett Kay singing with the choir. Fantastic. We're going to try to reproduce for you as much as we can of the real life experience over the next days and weeks. In our newsletter, it actually has then the list. So already tomorrow, we've got some more stuff coming up at 4:30. We'll have more Rosh Hashanah songs and so on. Rosh Hashanah is tomorrow night. I wish you all a Shana Tova. May the coming year, may the best of this year, the best of this year be the worst you'll ever have. I can see it. Lily's got her card. Look at that in our care. I can see that's up there. That's great. So some packs have arrived. May the very best of this year be the worst you will ever have for next year. May it be a fantastic year for all of us, without restriction and without health problems. And I wish you all a Shana Tova, and make sure that it becomes meaningful. There's no reason why this year can't be even more meaningful to you than in previous years, because you are the one who will make it meaningful, not a rabbi or a chazan. It's up to you. So Shana Tova to all of you.
To you too.
Thank you very much. Thanks. All the very best. Thank you very much for the Mazel Tov. Thank you very much. Yeah, I became a granddaddy yesterday as well. Thank you very much. Okay. All the very best to you all. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.